Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this exciting event this Friday afternoon. I'm really delighted to be sharing our impactful work today on identifying areas of underinvestment in Black businesses using open data. Today's event is a collaboration between DataKind and the Black Wealth Data Center. Next slide, please. Before we go into the meat of this presentation and the prototype demonstration, which we're very excited to be sharing, I do want to thank the funders of the work that we've been doing and driving forward in collaboration with the Black Wealth Data Center. So a huge thank you to the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth and to google.org. Next slide, please. So a little bit about today's session. We'll first introduce the two partners, us, DataKind, and our collaborators, the Black Wealth Data Center. We'll then dive into framing Black wealth across the United States, understanding the context, understanding our current work with the Black Wealth Data Center on the racial wealth equity database, and talking a little bit about the proposed solution. Why more data? Why now? We're then very excited to share a little bit about the solution development process that will talk about the methodology, the indicators that we're looking to explore, and then we'll very excitingly be doing a prototype tool demonstration with New York City as our key city of choice for today's event. We'll close out the session with a summary and next steps. And throughout this session, please feel free to use the chat box for any questions. We do have a Mentimeter down the road set up for us to have some live feedback while you use the tool and use the demonstration. So we very much look forward to getting your live feedback today. As shared by Ariana a little bit earlier in the session, I will be joined by Harsha and Kayla to really drive this presentation forward, demonstrating this true collaborative partnership between DataKind and the Black Wealth Data Center. So thank you both for joining me today for this presentation. To kick it off and talk a little bit about who we are at DataKind. DataKind is a global nonprofit organization that harnesses the power of data science and AI in the service of humanity. We team talented pro bono data scientists with social impact organizations and together design innovative solutions to tough social challenges. In sum, we aim to bridge the gap between technologists on the one hand and the social sector on the other hand. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Harsha to introduce the Black Wealth Data Center.
Thank you, Mallory. Next slide, please. Thank you. I am the director of data at Black Wealth Data Center. In one of my previous roles, I was a data scientist on Mayor Eric Garcetti's open data team in Los Angeles. So this feels like a full circle that I'm now here in New York and presenting at the Open Data Week here, like really excited. Who are we at the Black Wealth Data Center? The Black Wealth Data Center was launched in September of last year. So we are just about 6 months old. We are an initiative that is funded by the Greenwood team at Bloomberg Philanthropies. We see ourselves and data as a means to an end. They're great people and organizations now more than ever who are wanting to address the racial wealth inequity. And we think that is great. And the center is a resource to support organizers, policymakers who want to address racial wealth equity. We know that this work is multifaceted and rooted in history, but we also know that it requires data. If you could move to the next slide. So what are some of the challenges that we've seen as we've built out the Black Wealth Data Center? Often data that is disaggregated by race is inaccessible. I've spent hours looking through census tables, and I agree that I get lost in them quite often. So accessing data that is put out by the US Census Bureau can sometimes be a challenge. Often we also see that some of the indicators that show information disaggregated by race are incomplete. Some of the estimates in rural areas are not available for data disaggregated by race. And finally, often some of the most important metrics are not publicly available that are disaggregated by race. For example, the Small Business Administration has data sets around loans that are given to like small businesses, but that information is not disaggregated by race. So it's not really clear as to like the amounts of loans and funds that Black businesses have received in the last 15 years or so. So these are like some of the challenges that currently exist, and the Blackwell Data Center is here to like figure out a way to provide information that is accessible around wealth that is disaggregated by race. Next slide. So the center has 3 charges. The first charge is around accessing Blackwell data. This is done through our platform, blackwelldata.org, where we show information organized around like 5 wealth topics, including assets and debt, education, business ownership, home ownership, and employment. We've talked about some of the challenges in the previous slide around the state of Blackwell data, and we are here to advance the state of Blackwell data. It is in our mission to continue to improve data disaggregated by race and make it publicly available for community organizers, policymakers, program officers. And finally, like fuel data-driven solutions, and that is where the demo captures need of how like we are thinking about partnering with organizations such as DataKind to take information that is publicly available and develop tools for the social good. Next slide. So last year, we partnered with DataKind over a period of 6 months to both build what we call the racial wealth equity database that currently has around 36 publicly available data sets that have information on wealth disaggregated by race, and also develop Tableau visuals that are front-end facing on our platform, where we are able to like show information on wealth disaggregated by race. For example, the chart that you see here is basically the employment rates of STEM degree holders that are disaggregated by race and gender. So this is Women's History Month, and you'll see that while 63.7% of Asian men who have a STEM degree are employed in STEM fields, both Black women and Hispanic women have the lowest employment rates within a STEM field. So this is an example of some of the information that we have that are publicly available on our data set, on our platform. Next slide. This is also an example of an asset that we developed with DataKind last year. It shows you starting from 2007 all the way till 2019, what has been the average total assets for households disaggregated by race. You will see that there is a wealth gap between various types of households that are disaggregated by race. You will also see that since the 2008 recessions, the following years, all households saw a decline in the median total assets. But since 2013 onwards, like various households have either seen increase in their median total assets, or like especially for like Black households, there is a continued decline in the median value of their total assets. So this is another example of information that is available on that site. We do have on the chat the link to our Blackwell data platform. So I encourage all of you to like go there and like find the information for yourself. With that, I'll pass it back to Mallory.
Thanks so much, Harsha. And yes, we also encourage everyone to really go and explore for yourselves the incredible racial wealth equity database. So as Harsha has explained, we worked for 6 months together to pull and aggregate various publicly available data sets to build this database. And we're now in a position asking ourselves, how can we use the data identified to build tools to specific problems? And we started exploring the idea of underinvestment in Black businesses. in the US, we know that business ownership is really key to financial health. Studies have demonstrated that families with a self-employed head of household earn twice the average income of families with a head of household employed by someone else. Not only do they earn twice the average income, but they have a net worth of nearly 6 times higher. Despite capital being available at federal, state, and local levels, this does not reach Black-owned businesses at proportionate rates. Through our work and explorations, we've heard that financial institutions either rely on word of mouth or look at reports published by community development financial institutions, or just try their best to distribute capital to entrepreneurs. But none of this allows for a holistic and proactive approach to loan distribution for specific target population investments. Next slide, please. And this is particularly true in New York City, right, where everyone is right now for New York City Open Data Week, where while the Black community makes up 22% of the population, just 2% of businesses are owned by Black entrepreneurs. Overwhelmingly, Black entrepreneurs have cited access to capital as their top challenge to starting businesses. And this really echoes national trends that shows systemic disadvantages in seeking capital from a variety of different lenders. So using New York City as a case study, we can suspect that there is a clear gap between entrepreneurs who are seeking funding and the lenders who would like to support these small businesses. Next slide, please. And so while in the current presentation, New York City is our case study, we're really aiming to do a proposed solution nationwide. We know that there's an opportunity to solve for this key gap by making available capital accessible to Black business owners through marketing and advertising. And really, in order to target these opportunities, policymakers and other capital provision institutions need insight as to where to engage in these services. So together with the Black Wealth Data Center, to address this gap, we are in the process of developing a targeting tool to identify community zones for capital investment policy targeting. We will be using this tool only leveraging open data, as with the Racial Wealth Equity Database, and we'll be pulling indicators together from a variety of different areas. We'll be looking at business and commerce, community infrastructure, banking and finance, and demographic information to really build a comprehensive profile of communities that could be good candidates for business investment, but have traditionally been underinvested. This tool will really aim to be accessible in 2 ways. On the one hand, it will be as an interactive geographic visualization, similar to what you're seeing on the Racial Wealth Equity Database website, and as a GitHub repository, which will be accessible through an open source license. And I'm delighted now to hand it over to my colleague, Kayla, a data scientist at DataKind, to talk a little bit more specifically about how we propose to develop this solution. Kayla, over to you.
Great, thank you, Mallory. We can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk a bit about how we developed the solution for this tool, and then I'm gonna go into the prototype of looking at New York City. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So when we went into this, we wanted to create a process that was going to be, customizable, is going to be expandable, so that we knew we were going to be looking at different indicators and doing a lot of exploratory analysis, some statistical analysis, trying to figure out what would be useful to have included in the index, trying to target this underinvestment idea. And so we wanted to first create a process that, was methodologically sound, that we could, plug and play the different indicators into. And so we've started with that. And created out this pipeline that we have been, taking to experts in the field and in our community and our partners, such as Black Wealth Data Center and other like community loan funds, get feedback from them on our approach and our different indicators that we're looking at. And so we've been trying to validate with them, and it's sort of an ongoing process right now. We have a set of indicators that we have gotten positive feedback on, and we have built the tool around right now, but it is an ongoing process of continuing to get feedback. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So to just get, sorry, just a little bit of technical details here about how we actually create the index. And this is, agnostic to the indicators right now, but the index starts, and for New York City, we're using this at the zip code level since it is such, a densely populated area. We wanted to try to go a bit more granular for the cities. And so we'll use this approach for most the metropolitan areas. But, then once we are building it out for like states, we can look at, within county level or, even like federally, we could compare different states and rank them based so that people, at different levels, maybe in government, could use it at what would be applicable for their geographic level. But for New York City, how we worked at this was for each zip code, we have a set of indicators. And for each indicator, we just standardize those so that we have a z-score so that all the indicators are, weighted equally. And then we are applying weights. Currently, we're using equal weights. We are just, however, making sure that all the indicators have the same correlation and interpretation so that, a higher value right now always means more need for investment. And then we would take the mean of all of the indicators for each zip code and finally standardize that to get a z-score for each zip code. And so you can use that z-score to compare the different zip codes and their need. And the higher the z-score, the more need for the zip code. We in the future plan to go ahead and normalize this between 0 and 1, just because it can be kind of a little off-putting maybe to see a negative number, so that everything will be positive. Might make a little more sense when you're looking at it, but it will still have the same interpretation of higher would be more investment need. And yeah, so this is all, a pretty standard approach for creating an index. And we're happy to say that this is all built out as a pipeline, and we can kind of just, again, like drop in our indicators, which I'm going to go into next on the next slide. Great. So these are the current indicators, and I'm not going to read all this. I'll let you guys read this on your own. But I just want to talk a little bit about like the process of creating these and selecting these. And so this was actually an effort amongst like our team and also working with Black Wealth Data Center. That, we had there was a stage of collecting a lot of data sets and also using data that Black Wealth Data Center has already identified as useful, and doing a lot of exploratory data analysis of trying to figure out, what did we see were highly correlated with underinvestment? How could we, what would be useful in these different categories to really help identify different localities and geographies that needed more investment. And so, we tried to, identify indicators that had a lot of variance so that, you'd actually have a lot of meaning in the index, not get the same value for each area. Thinking about different statistical properties that, these were correlated, but not perfectly correlated. So you're getting information from each different indicator. Trying to spread across these different categories, as Mallory mentioned. So, if you look at these right now, we're covering categories of like banking and finance, business and commerce, population information, and community infrastructure. And I'll talk about this later, but we want to, add some other categories such as education and housing, just trying to get at different, subcategories within our targeted outcome. And, we've kind of been trying to follow like the OECD handbook, if you've read it, on how to create an index of, trying to find these subcategories and making sure everything is, correlated and working in the same direction. So just to like touch on these indicators briefly, for banking and finance, we wanted to look at the total CDFI and MDI number of banks in the area, as compared to the African-American population. And I'll go into this in a little bit. And also we wanted to compare the mean PPP loan approval for Black and African Americans versus the white mean PPP loan approval amount. And we wanted to compare the Black and white. We wanted to use a ratio of this so that we could get sort of a counterfactual of that underinvestment. Looking in business and commerce, we wanted to look at the businesses per Black or African American capita in the area. Currently, we are using just total number of businesses. Ideally, we would like to have the Black or African American owned businesses, but as Harsha mentioned, it can be hard to find these data broken down by race. And we've been digging and have not yet found a usable data set that gives us actually the minority owned businesses by geographic. So if anyone has info on that, we'd love some feedback. If anyone has a great source that I have not yet found, that would be much appreciated. And then, as you know, just some basic demographics of the share of the population in the area that is Black or African American, and also the median income for Black or African American. And then for all of these, I've been saying Black or African American, that is simply because the census, when you record the race, it is the option for Black or African American. They don't break it down just to Black, which, again, would be ideal, but this is maybe just a drawback of public data, is kind of have to use what is available. So that is just to clarify that note. And then finally, the HUD opportunity zones, which are areas that have been designated for special tax breaks for investment. And so we are just using locations that have been identified as an opportunity zone to mean that they would need more investment. If you can go to the next slide. I just kind of show you a little bit in graphs a little more about a couple of these indicators to maybe give a little more insight. So this was just the number of CDFI and MDIs per zip code as compared to the percent of the population of African American and Black alone. So, higher, further to the right would mean that the zip code has a higher percent of the population is African American or Black. And then, the further up on the y-axis, there's more banks. And so these are MDIs and CDFIs. And I should explain what those are if you don't know. MDI is a Minority Depository Institution, which are institutions that are either owned or directed principally by a minority group. And then CDFIs are Community Development Financial Institutions, and they are targeted at expanding economic opportunities in low income communities by making sure that products are available to everybody in those communities. So you can see sort of this negative relationship between these two variables. And so we wanted to, create an indicator that would allow us to target those zip codes and geographies that we're seeing that, really do have this large population of African-American and Blacks within their zip code, but, are maybe not as don't have this targeted efforts of MDIs and CDFIs yet. So that is kind of where maybe one of these indicators came from. Next slide. And this is just, I think, a nice map of, I was talking about the HUD opportunity zones, and these have been, already federally designated zones at the census tract level here that are targeted for, that extra tax break that give an incentive for investors to work within these communities. And so you can just start to see, this is the New York City area of the 306 census tracts across the 5 boroughs that have been designated. And so we're just using this as kind of like an indicator for zip codes that have already being targeted. And next slide. And then I'm going to do a demonstration. We can switch to my screen. Just a second. Great. So this is the current, the demonstration of what we've built out so far. And this is Tableau if you're not familiar with it, but it makes really great, interactive maps that we can play around with. And it jives really well with already BWDC's, their website and everything. So what you're looking at obviously is just the map of New York City broken down by zip code, and shout out to New York City Open Data Week they actually provided, I got the shapefile for New York City from them. So very cool. And So yeah, so you can look at each zip code, and as you hover over it, it'll tell you the zip code and some selected information. So you'll see right now it's showing you the index value, and then where it falls in the quartiles of the zip codes with that index. And I'll say that the higher the value, the more need for investment. So the higher quartile, the higher need for investment, which is this dark green value, but there's also a legend over here for you. And then, just a couple selected, the median income, and then the median income for, Black and African-American in that area. So you can look, and click on each one if you just want to highlight that. But if you can also come over here to where we've put in parameters and different filters. For the parameters, you can actually go ahead and, select the constructed index if you're interested in the full index totally. But if for some reason you have, a more targeted need, you can select each of the different indicators that I've gone over, and it will update, and, the rankings and everything will update as well. So you'll be able to see, like, on the income indicator, which zip codes, how they ranked on this indicator instead. So let me go back to the index indicator. And then also you can go ahead, and we've added some filters for you that you can, play with. And if you have a targeted need, and you can drop down to like a lower income for the African-American and Black alone, and sort of see how the zip codes fare there. So, if you were like trying to establish a new CDFI or an MDI, just as an example, and you wanted to target, based on the definition, you want to target an area that, is primarily a minority, you could look for the zip codes and filter out to just the African-American and Black alone. And, so this index provides a little more information than just if you were trying to identify zip codes with, high minority groups. You could then actually see like that these might be a better target zip code rather than, looking at these other ones if you're looking for where to put a bank. And you could filter by any of these if you had any other possibility, other interests. But yeah, we're hoping to make this really targeted for your needs. Sorry about the dog barking, but trying to make this targeted, for everybody's needs, and keeping it flexible, so that you can play around and get to the different, make it targeted for your needs, but also, keeping it within boundaries of, it's been built and constructed for you. So it should be fairly easy if you want to come in and quickly pull some numbers for whatever your report or use is. So I think we're going to let you all play with it for a few minutes. And also please join us at the link. This is public, and we are going to leave it up for a couple weeks for everybody to play with. But as it is, a prototype, and as we keep working on it, we're going to be updating and releasing new versions. So let me give it back to Mallory.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, Kayla. So as Kayla mentioned, I put the link in the chat for the publicly available Tableau prototype. Feel free to use that link, save that link. We will keep the link available for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Again, we are still very much in the prototype phase. While we're delighted to share the work that we're driving forward with the Blackwell Data Center, we're also here to get your insight, your feedback, your on-the-ground knowledge and perspective around what you'd like to see more of, how useful and user-friendly is this tool. The stakeholders that we're really looking to share this tool with are not only MDIs or CDFIs, as Kayla had shared. We're looking to share this with government institutions, academic researchers, journalists. So we very much welcome the perspective and use of this tool from all of these different stakeholders to make sure that we are presenting and sharing information in a way that is most interesting to the different perspectives of our users. I know that Brendan will be sharing his screen again. We have a Mentimeter. While you're playing with the Tableau, we'd really welcome a little bit of feedback on how this tool is to you. So while we're getting that set up, I know that I wanted to just take a minute because I know that we had a question in the chat that was a great question from Anne. Anne, you asked, how do you identify good candidates for capital investment? And what do you define to be underinvested in the tool? Such a great question. So again, just before handing it off to my colleagues, Harsha and Kayla, to help provide some answers, this is still the prototyping phase, and we are still in conversation with a variety of different stakeholders to get their on-the-ground insight around making sure that any definition that we think about, any indicator that we build, is fully based on the ground knowledge. But Harsha, we'll pass it over to you to add a little bit more color here to my answer.
Thank you, Anne, for the question, and thank you for the response, Mallory. We're still I think for us, it's really important to get feedback from users who will actually use this tool. For example, in the coming weeks, we are getting on a call with network of Black CDFIs to show them the tool, to get their feedback, and identify if the tool meets their needs, what additional indicators would they like to see, and again going back onto the drawing board to figure out what additional data that we can bring into the list of indicators based on feedback that is provided by this network of Black CDFIs. Bloomberg Philanthropies, which funds the Blackwell Data Center, has an extensive network of mayors, funders. So we are looking into tap into that network and put this tool in front of as many stakeholders as possible, so that we know that what we are building is useful to them and that the information is easily accessible. I'll pass it on to Kayla. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think your question is, again, a great question. Kind of the core challenge is really, how do we define underinvestment and how do we find things correlated with that, right? And so hopefully I touched a bit on it, on creating those indicators, but for a couple of those indicators, as I was saying, we wanted to look at how it compares based on race, different racial groups, trying to get at a bit of a counterfactual, right? Because underinvestment implies that maybe we know what the investment should be, which we obviously can't say for sure, but thinking about counterfactuals, it's maybe what is the investment and what does success look like for for white people in that area. So that's kind of one way we're thinking about it, is comparing the different racial groups within areas. But there's a lot of different ways we've been thinking about it.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. A few answers here on the screen. Thank you for those who have provided some insight. Super helpful feedback. Is there a way to scroll the map? I tried the usual gestures and I couldn't figure it out. Great feedback. Something that we'll definitely take into consideration. Kayla, apologies if I'm missing something. I'm outside of New York City. How relevant is this for us? Thoughts on what to tell my city data leaders. So the objective of this tool, while today we are presenting a New York City specific case study, we are aiming to have this be a national map. Similar to the racial wealth equity database, we're pulling nationally publicly available data sets to really have this be available nationally, so that city data leaders, journalists, individuals anywhere across the United States can access this publicly available dashboard and play around with the different indicators to get the insights and answer the questions that they're looking to answer. We have a great question here as well in the chat from Hazel. Do these programs have the input of any people of color? This would help to shape some assumptions about various racial groups. Yes, Hazel, I'll pass it over to Harsha to share a little bit more about how we are absolutely engaging people of color through this stakeholder engagement process.
Thanks, Mallory. Hazel, I was just about to type up an answer, but absolutely, I think the first set of feedback we will be gathering is from the network of Black CDFIs. But we will be proactive in reaching out to community members who will use who we intend to use these tools. We have an amazing network of stakeholders in the Prosperity Now network and the Bloomberg Philanthropies network who are looking to fund who are looking to develop programs on the ground. Like we also work with a set of mayors in Black majority cities. So like all of these tools will like this tool will go in front of all of them to like gather feedback. And if you think of a group that we should reach out to, like please do let us know. And we are happy to like be proactive and reach out to groups that you think might be helpful as well and providing feedback to this tool.
Thanks so much, Harsha. If we could go to the next slide, we have another mentee question. How can we build from here to best support your work? Again, the tool that we are building is really to help support the work of financial institutions, government institutions, advocacy groups in order to have the data-driven insight they need to answer some key questions. So we'd really welcome some feedback. Feel free to type it again in menti.com or directly in the chat so that we can gather all of this insight and information and make sure we take it into consideration as we continue to build out this prototype towards its final product. And again, a fantastic question. Do you compare historical investment to other businesses in similar geographic areas to determine whether a particular business is underinvested? This is a great question. Kayla or Harsha, do we have insight? Is this something we're still working to build and define? But this is a fantastic question. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, another great question. This is something we are going into in the future. And I just want to clarify, we're not looking at necessarily specific businesses that need investment. Simply, we are looking at geographic areas. So it's a bit more of like an average wide across the area. But yes, we are going to be looking at business. We're trying to add some more, I'll talk about this actually in one of the next slides, but we are looking at some more ways to look at business investment in the area and how they've been invested in the past and how they're looking in the future and how different areas are getting more or less investment. But yeah, we are trying to add more business investment indicators and work into the index. Harsha, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, we are recording the presentation and we'll be happy to share the slides as well with Open Data Week presenters. And we have all of your email addresses who have registered for this event. So we will be sure to share the deck with you. Great. Some fantastic questions and feedback. When do you think the final product will be available? So we, again, are still building this prototype with the Blackwell Data Center. Our current timeline is to have a final product in the next 6 to 8 months. Please continue to follow us at DataKind and the Blackwell Data Center. As soon as we have a final product available with a publicly available link, we will be sure to share that across all of our social networks for you to access and hope to be able to do a launch event as well to share this more widely. Other great feedback. It looks like the Blackwell Data Center offers data for counties and zip codes. Will cities be available in the future?
I can take.
Yeah, please, Harsha, absolutely.
So right now, like just to clarify, the Blackwell Data Center is not a data collector or a data publisher. So we don't collect data that's being showed. Like we bring in data sets from federally available data sets, and especially from the US Census, there is no agreed upon definition of like what a city is. So that is why like right now we don't show information at a city level, but maybe like in the future we'll start showing information at like major metropolitan areas as a proxy for like showing information for cities.
Thanks so much, Harsha. And just again, to highlight something else, a great piece of feedback, specific set of instructions for the tools, ways that has helped others. So thinking maybe about case studies in the future and what we have learned from this research. This is all really fantastic feedback. Thank you so much for audience members for providing this information. And at the end of this event session, we'll also be putting our email addresses in the chat. So we also welcome any feedback directly to us. If we could go to the next slide, thank you so much. We just want to, again, do a quick summary and next steps. So actually handing it over to Kayla to talk about some of the additional indicators we're looking to explore in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so we've touched on this a bit, but, as we said, there's a few other categories that we want to look at into adding into the indicators. As we talked about, I think education is a category that we haven't really gotten to touch on yet. So looking at, university density, minority business coaching programs, trying to add those in categories of home ownership. And then, as I mentioned, finding data on, not just business amounts, but, actually like Black-owned businesses and Black-owned banks would be great. And then finally, as we also, touched on, was a bit of funding, looking at venture capital funding and, small business loan funding into the different areas and seeing how that's playing out as far as investments within the different geographies. So we're excited to see how all these hopefully add some information for our index. And if you have suggestions for others, please let us know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kayla. And then again, just for the final slide. So we know that to better target opportunities to Black-owned businesses, our stakeholders need greater data-driven insight to know where to focus their outreach and to offer these capital resources. So we are just delighted to be partnering with the Black Wealth Data Center on this, building off of our work on the Racial Wealth Equity Database, and really starting to explore ways in which we can leverage this publicly available data to solve specific questions. The tool will be available in both a geographic visualization, interactive geographic visualization, and as a GitHub repository. So please do stay in touch. Follow us on social media. We have information that we are very much excited to share with you. Over the next couple of months, our aim is to connect with key stakeholders, key users of this tool to make sure that we're incorporating their perspectives and clear feedback for the final iteration. I will be popping our email addresses in the chat, so please feel free to reach out directly to us. And I know that Harsha at the Black Wealth Data Center also has some office hours, so handing it over to him to just share a quick overview of how you can connect directly with him.
Thank you. I will drop a link in the chat to our Connect page. So right now, we don't have new office hours opening up there, but they should soon. But you can also sign up to our newsletter using the Connect page. And if you go back to the Connect page, next week we should have some office hours that would open up. Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today for this Open Data Week presentation. We look forward to staying in touch to getting your feedback and perspectives and input and opinions for the development of this tool.